You wake up in a wooden cabin. The only thing before you is a wooden table and a pair of eyes. Suddenly, a voice is speaking at you, handing you a set of cards. In this set, there lies many squirrels, a stoat, some wolves. A scale and a bell are placed on your left, as a shadowy figure before you plays her own set of cards. You notice that the stoat card has a drop of blood on top, and the wolves have two of the same symbol. You're then told to place down the squirrel and use it as a blood sacrifice to play the stoat card, which speaks a player. The stoat card then attacks the figure. Eventually, after several turns of playing and drawing more cards, the scales tip down against the shadow. This begins the game of Inscryption, a deck-building game released on October 19th, 2021 by Daniel Mullins Games. This video will contain spoilers for the game. I highly recommend it, as I bought it in the past weekend and beat it in less than 48 hours. It's currently available to purchase on Steam, and is not a hard game to understand. Please play the game and give it some love before proceeding with this video any further, as Inscryption is a one-of-a-kind experience. I wouldn't want this video to tarnish any sort of enjoyment for the game. I seriously cannot hammer this point in any further. This game is fantastic, and the rest will continue with me gushing over the story, gameplay, and more. The background footage is taken directly from me playing the game for the second time. No footage is going to be used from the second or third acts, as I don't want anyone scrolling through the play bar to be spoiled by what is presented in these following acts. Now, let's move forward into the story. As stated before, Inscryption begins in a wooden cabin where you have the ability to walk around and interact with different objects, solve puzzles, or resume playing the card game presented to you at the very beginning. You have to do both in order to beat the campaign. It shows a traveler going through the wilderness and encountering different characters. Through this, you can build your deck with more powerful and useful cards such as the Black Goat, Grizzly, and more. You'll also encounter more things that alter your pre-existing cards. One such example is a Stone of Sacrifice. You sacrifice one of your cards with a special ability, and it's removed from your deck forever. However, the payoff is that you will have the ability to give said ability to another card in your deck. Take the Magpie, for example. The Magpie has two sigils that give the ability of flying, and the ability to draw a card from your deck once the Magpie is played. If you sacrifice this Magpie onto something like the Cockroach, which has the ability to return to your hand after it is slain on the board, your Cockroach now flies, searches, and is unkillable. The shadowy figure who narrates this section of the game is building a story for your adventure as you continue down this path. The opening cabin section for this game truly sets up for what the rest of this player has in store for them. This section of the game also introduces a character that you will play as through Inscryption, Luke Carter. Luke is a card-collecting YouTuber who manages to find a card that has a set of coordinates that leads him to a floppy disk in Toronto in Canada. On the floppy disk, it contains a certain game that is called Inscryption from the developer game Funa. Luke has been narrating over the game, occasionally speaking and commenting with quick lines to remind the user he's there. I won't be talking much about Luke as he doesn't really add to the story too much in the format that I would like to go for. This essay is going to focus on specifically the contents inside of the game within the game, not the story of Luke Carter, which, although they both overlap somewhat, I would much rather talk about the characters within the cabin and in Acts 2 and 3. Beyond Luke, the first act of the game finishes off with a boss battle against the shadowy figure. After defeating him, the game restarts from the beginning. It tells a tale of four scribes: Grimora, the scribe of death, who is trapped inside of the Stinkbug card; PO3, the scribe of technology, who is trapped inside of the Stoat card; and Magnificus, the scribe of magics, who is trapped inside of the Stunted Wolf card. There is a fourth, Leshy, the scribe of beasts, the one who kept you inside of his cabin, and is the shadowy figure from the beginning. Thus begins
a 16-bit
adventure where you get to walk around and discover areas for the different scribes. Grimora's dark graveyard filled with skeletons, PO3's technology factory filled to the brim with robots and parts on an assembly line, Magnificus's magic tower filled with spells, and his students, and Leshy still with his own cabin in the woods as he sits waiting for the player to progress with their story. With each region, they all have their own new card types. Grimora has the cards relating to the undead, using the bone system which was introduced inside of Leshy's cabin. PO3's tech cards, which use up a new energy system that increases by 1 unit every turn until it is full, as the meter also replenishes every turn. Magnificus's magic cards use a system that, if I'm going to be completely honest, I don't really understand. I didn't really use them in my playthrough. I used the tech cards, the dead cards, and Leshy's beast cards, which use the same exact system as presented in his cabin. And rather from earning your cards by just wandering upon on a map, you have to find card packs, which you can now also select specifically which cards you want to have in your deck, rather than just having all of the ones that you've obtained, since there are so many more that you can collect at this point in the game. You do have to defeat 3 Guardian-like characters for each of the scribes. Leshy already has his introduced Prospector, Angler, and Trader before moving on to the Scribe of Beasts. PO3 has his guard bots, Magnificus has his 3 students, Grimora has 3 skeletons who've already met their death. Defeating all 4 will allow you to choose a scribe you wish to become. Regardless of who you choose, the outcome will be the same. The game begins to glitch out before you wake up to see PO3 in 3 dimensions. This is the beginning of the third and final act of Inscryption. The game went back to its 3D art style from before. The game is now played in a fully explainable world, like the 16-bit session from Act 2, with a very similar outline, but you have to navigate it like you would with Leshy's story map. PO3 talks about the Great Transcendence, but doesn't give you any further incitement into it, and only claims that it is good. You can't move freely from the table, like you could with Leshy until a certain point. PO3 doesn't force you to restart when you die. You only drop your currency and push forward once more. This shows a major difference between the 2 scribes you follow. Leshy very much shows how he cares about the story more so than anything else. He wants you to continue living the story. His entire existence is centered around it. He wants the games to continue, but he wants the story to be told time and time again. Hence why he doesn't offer checkpoints and only creates a card in your memory for the next challenger to go for. On the other hand, PO3 prefers the game over the story. He gives checkpoints for you to speed through the game. There is no reset like there is with Leshy. All PO3 desires is for the player to reach his goal. And that's why the writing for this game is so good. The 2 main storyline characters are complete opposites of one another. Leshy starts off with the same intentions as he does in the end. However, to a new player, he seems very threatening. It feels like a shadowy figure of darkness, keeping them trapped for eternity, and thrives off the suffering of a man as he continues to let these things play out. When in reality, Leshy just wants to continue his own story. He does everything he can to allow the challengers to see the story through the end. Once they do, Leshy's killed and turned into a card as the user is forced to begin the game anew. This is very different when compared to PO3, who is constantly talking down the story. All he does is complain, and instead furthers you to complete his goal, that being the Great Transcendence. Once it does conspire, you do get to see the Great Transcendence. And the other scribes are not a fan of that. Grimora decides to delete the game that they're all in. As the game around you begins to fall, you then get to face off against all of the scribes, minus PO3, for the final time. The first person you get to fight is Grimora, as she is the character with the least amount of data attached to her. Her fight is pretty bare bones, no pun intended. So, she's the first one to go, and she shakes your hand because she clearly respects you, and that's basically all there is to know with her fight. It then fades to black as you're brought back to Leshy's cabin once again. A somber version of the game's main theme begins to play, which you've heard underneath my voice this entire time. Leshy doesn't try to stop the deletion, he just solemnly accepts his fate as he gets one more game in with the challenger before it's time to go. He doesn't want to keep score, nor does he want to see who a winner is. He just wants to play the game until he can't play it anymore. Leshy continues to reminisce over past events that have transpired in his cabin, calling out your strongest cards as you play them, saying that he does remember how strong they all were. Eventually, you can't end a turn anymore. The cards fade, the table fades, and it's just you shaking hands. And instead of those hands reaching out to kill you, they're here to give you a handshake. And as you shake his hand, he goes. Leshy has been deleted from the game files as you move on to the final section against Magnificus. Magnificus attempts to fight the user with his magic, which was definitely very funny for me, who had no idea how to use the magic cards. But, regardless, it still leaves him being deleted, and he eventually fights so much that he doesn't have the energy to move towards the challenger and shake her hand before he disappears into nothingness. Marks the ending of Inscryption's main campaign. There's a lot more to unpack with this game, as there was even an event in real life with a floppy disk in the woods of Toronto, just like in the game. However, that's not what this video is about. This is about the game itself, not the ARG and code surrounding it. This game told a fantastic story with simple yet addicting gameplay. The amount of twists and turns within this 3-act structure and character development was phenomenal. I made this here today because I want this game on other people's radars, and I think spreading it through this sort of means is a good way to do so. I can't express how much I love this game enough, because I really can't. There's no words to say that I just enjoyed this as much as I did. It was such a perfect game, which is, I know, difficult to say, but yeah, I honestly believe this game is perfect. I can't wait to go back into it and enjoy the Casey's mod expansion that gives you an endless mode for the Leshy's Cabin portion of the game. And I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble, as I plan to do more videos like this in the future for other games that have piqued my interest. Inscryption was just the first one I did because it was the most recent game I played, and I wanted to spread the word about it more. Thank you for watching.